Hi, my name is Dakota,
Hi, I'm Tushar.
and we are going to show you how you can leverage Carter to breeze through a DDQ. And so in this example, we're just using a standard ILPA, the 2.0 version of this DDQ, and we're going to go to section 2 and just kind of start filling it out. So you see here, it's asking questions about the legal structure of the fund and tax structure. If you have any particular tax structure memos, add those along and describe any distinctive features. Then it goes to a bunch of other questions ranging from placement agents to capital raising timelines, etc. So what you can kind of do here is you can see the different ways you can interact with Carter to help you do this question. So I personally like this as my preferred mechanism for interacting with Carter, where I say, hey, go do this task, bring everything back to me. But for each thing you bring back to me, explain to me why you did that. It helps me get very rich context about what my answer should be. And then I ultimately go in and leverage a lot of these insights to create and craft answers myself. So that's like one way somebody might interact with it. Another way that you might be able to interact with Carter is to say, hey, run off and go do all this stuff. Write it a response as if you are me. I personally also like to kind of play with this and mix it a little bit with this. And so I'm able to take this kind of core answer to a question and further enrich it with all the explanation. And then, of course, at the bottom of this, Carter gives you more detailed explanations as well as to where he's getting all this information and how he has decided to come to these conclusions. So it basically helps you cut down the time that it would take for doing a DDQ by half. And if there were more examples that Carter can reference of other questions you've answered like this, it'd come even faster and you'd spend even less time because he knows exactly how to speak like you. So he can help you a lot. I also like this version of it where basically you go in and say, answer this question, Carter, and you go question by question. I think this works really well for questions where there's a bunch of nuance and detail, and you can continue to probe Carter asking for further and further information. And I think that tends to be quite helpful for very detailed questions that are kind of complex and require a lot of data sources. The most important thing to understand is that Carter is always pulling across all data sources. So all of the access that he has to your other DDQs, any email communications, Slack communications, Airtables, anything that he has access to, your fund documents, he's using all of that context and information to help make these answers. And so they're very rich with context. I also like to think about, this is another example where I think some of these one question by question kind of approaches can be helpful when they're pretty detailed like this. So one example I like here is like, hey, give me 3 to 5 examples of an exited investment where the TVPI wasn't that high, where it was under 1. So you basically lost money on the investment. And Carter goes through and gives it one for an e-commerce company, describes very in depth what went wrong, which actions were taken, which different experts you engaged to try and mitigate the issue that you had. And ultimately kind of gives this broader explanation of the whole context of what happened. So again, you have this base answer, but a lot more rich context about how you can further explain this to LPs. And you can use this for the DDQ, but you can also use this in regular communications with LPs and helping to summarize for meetings and for presentations that you do. What are some of these key things that have happened in the past as case studies? He does it again for this fintech company here. You can see the actions taken, experts engaged, explanation. So, I really think that this is another great way to interact with Carter when there are going to be a lot more depth to the questions that you're asking. The last one here that I like to see, a working example kind of showing a preferred return being reached and kind of going into some more of the scenarios that might mitigate or increase or decrease this preferred return. So there's a couple of different ways that Carter kind of goes through this. And again, Carter's trained on this kind of information. So he's making these examples up just as you would make them up with like his brain, so to speak, which is the model. And the first scenario is just basic, $200 million, drawn from LPs, kind of shows this distribution, which is a standard 80-20. And so things happen as usual. And Carter explains how all this stuff happened as usual. Then you have an example of a credit facility being drawn and the impact on the preferred return. Well, in this case, you were actually able to leverage the credit facility to go make the investments. And so you don't actually have to draw LP capital until it's time to repay the credit facility. So because you don't have to draw LP capital until then, the preferred return kind of timeline counts when that drawdown comes instead of being when you first get the credit facility. So this can be a way to enhance returns. And it gives us an explanation. And then the last piece here is, of course, a write-off where a company didn't do well in a pretty massive way. And so it can affect the preferred return to the point where there's no carry to the GP. So you can see all of those examples here. And of course, again, Carter is really adept at these kind of situations in a way that a basic off-the-shelf model wouldn't be, because Carter is deeply trained on how to understand these particular nuances in context of LP questions, DDQs, LPAs, PPMs, and all of this nuance that comes along with being in one of these funds. So I hope this was a helpful session for you to understand a little bit more about how Carter can be a co-pilot for you and filling out complex documents like DDQs and RFPs. And if you want to use Carter to do this or leverage him, we'd love to have him join your team.